Secretary of State is absolutely living in a completely different world to my constituents, because they're not asking for this on the doorstep.
The House of Commons went berserk after Ashfield's Reform UK MP Lee Anderson just dismantled Ed Miliband on poaching the funds reserved for pensioners to spend on green energy production initiatives by the Labour Party. Now, we already know that the Labour Party is already under a lot of criticism after Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced that the winter pension funds would be used for major UK investments. And once again, the pension funds are at stake for the Great British Energy Project, short for GB Energy. The project focuses on producing eco-friendly energy, which requires a lot of money to keep operating. After the Labour Party proposed using pension funds in green energy projects, the UK MP Lee Anderson seemed to have a problem with the idea, which he outspoke straightforwardly.
On GB Energy, yet rob our pensioners of 300 quid at the same time. But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Quietly so, the people of the UK have already been in a great distress over the past few years due to the sudden inflation. On top of that, they now have to hear that the government was robbing the £300 that were given to them and put them in the funds for the GB Energy Project. They wouldn't certainly want their money snubbed away from them if they didn't get any subsidy in their everyday life expense in its stead. Anderson is not the only MP to bash the Energy Secretary Ed Miliband on the GB Energy Project. Earlier, he was dragged into the middle of the House by another Reform MP, Richard Tice.
Because the truth is that the offshore wind turbines bid today are some 20% above current prices. The floating offshore wind is some 3 times the current prices.
Tice criticized Miliband's obsession with investing too heavily in the project as the Labour government announced another 9 offshore wind farms.
His own department, Madam Deputy Speaker, say that actually this requires subsidies of some £1.5 billion a year. That's before the extra transmission costs.
Tice also pointed out the source of all the information he cited to show the Energy Secretary's project's lucrative expenses.
And so why would the Secretary of State be honest and tell the truth that renewable energy is more expensive, not cheaper?
The Energy Secretary retaliated with a jab at Tice's purpose of bringing the issue up. Miliband literally mocked the Reform UK MP and called him out for intervention in such a beneficial initiative for the common people.
Secretary of State.
I have to say that I'm interested in the Honourable Gentleman's intervention because his manifesto is basically for higher bills and to make people poorer.
The government's initiative for a clean energy production scheme was in light of the previous decade of the country's dependence on market-bought fossil fuels and bioenergy sources, which caused serious financial problems for them in their bills and budgets.
And you don't need to look into the crystal ball, you just need to look at the record. Because the truth is that the cost of living crisis, the energy bills crisis, casts a long shadow in this country.
Miliband underlined the importance of such a clean energy source so that the country gets out of an energy shortage and the citizens get some relief from the expense in the shape of bills and fuel in the future. Fossil fuels and energy sources are always traded on the market, even if the country extracted them themselves. Thus, acquiring a fuel source from its own territory and then paying the price for it is always a lose-lose situation for a country.
And he just needs to understand this very basic point, which is that whether fossil fuels are produced in this country or internationally, they are sold on the international market.
Keeping all these negative factors in mind, maybe the GB Energy Project was an investment on the people's part that would do them and their generations good in the future, as it would get Britain off the international market for energy purchasing, saving their revenue and getting them on the track to take back control. However, the country's politics has become more of a sabotage and blame game, which has left the general public confused about the initiatives that are good for them and which aren't. There is always some sacrifice to be made if you are seeking independence.
The only way to get off the roller coaster of international gas markets and take back control.
After Tice, Anderson also took a turn to bring the lucrative expenses under the limelight, which affected the lives of the public. Most were very angry and disappointed with the announcement, as that pension was half or even more than half of their monthly budget.
Okay, now then, this Secretary of State is absolutely living in a completely different world to my constituents, because they're not asking for this on the doorstep.
Miliband's reaction to the questions was the same. His stance remains unchanged, as he thinks that the future of Britain lies in a clean and cheaper energy source for every part of the country. Once operational, the GB energy projects will be able to provide enough power for 11 million homes, which will result in lower bills and fuel rates for the public.
I could say to the honourable gentleman, by the way, I thought that they supported a publicly owned energy company in his party, but I may be wrong about that. I can absolutely say to him that this is the way.
According to Ed Miliband, the Labour Party aims to provide that for the country's poor people, and that is why they need a little contribution from their money as well. The clean and almost free energy after the project is the light at the end of the tunnel for people already frustrated by the high energy bills and fares.
Does he believe that continuing reliance on fossil fuels as a country, saying no to renewables, which I think is their position, will give us energy security?
The rift between Lee Anderson and Ed Miliband on GB energy expenses is long born. A few months ago, MP Anderson had slammed the Secretary of Energy over his intentions with the company.
I'd just like to remind him that just a few years ago, in Nottingham, the Labour-controlled Nottingham City Council had their own energy company called Robin Hood Energy.
Keep in mind that the example of the Robin Hood Energy Scheme, another initiative taken by the Labour Party, stands in front of the people of the UK, which failed miserably due to bad planning. The initiative of GB Energy, another scheme similar to the RHE, left people, including Anderson, wondering if the firm was going to meet the same fate as the former blunder and whether GB Energy would affect their tax money as much as Robin Hood Energy did.
It was Robin Hood with a modern twist. It robbed from the poor and gave to the rich and cost the taxpayer about £50 million. So from that dispatch box, can the Secretary of State please tell the House how much GB Energy is going to cost the taxpayer?
Statistics show that Robin Hood Energy was a retailing company that did not generate energy independently. Instead, it bought energy and distributed it among the areas using taxpayers' money, which the Secretary also mentioned.
Secretary of State.
Well, look, first of all, if I can explain to the honourable gentleman, Robin Hood Energy was a supply company. This is a generation company. So Robin Hood was a retailer. So it's different.
Meanwhile, GB Energy is purely an initiative to generate energy instead of buying it. Once GB Energy becomes fully functional, the taxpayer will no longer need to pay the bills, which averaged over £4,000 in the current year. This was the point that Miliband insisted upon in his response to the MP Lee Anderson.
That we cannot allow £4,000 energy bills in January, £3,500 in October. That is an emergency.
While tensions remain on the rise between the Labour government and the opposition over the issue of the GB energy funds being taken through the tax and funds allocated for the people, one thing remains uncertain. How long will it take before the initiatives taken by the Labour Party can actually benefit the public, instead of disasters like the Robin Hood Energy losing up to £50 million of the taxpayers' class of Great Britain? The point of Lee Anderson and his fellow Reform UK MPs remains stressed upon this question.